You're going to be meeting with European leaders in Versailles to discuss the impact, including the economic impacts of the war in Ukraine. Many in Europe, including, I think, sort of quietly want to use the war in Ukraine to boost up military spending and closen our relationship to NATO, and yet they seem, you use excuses about Europe to say you can do nothing about rising fuel and energy costs because Europe wouldn't allow it. So Europe's happy to coordinate on militarisation, not so happy to coordinate on protecting working people in Europe and in this country against the rising cost of fuel and energy, which is going to immiserate them. Shouldn't you be going to Europe as part of this process, which is part of the European semester process, to say we need radical emergency action and we want the licence to introduce controls on the price of energy, gas, not just, by the way, petrol and diesel. What about gas? What about heating, oil and so on? All the things that are immiserating people before the war in Ukraine and even more so as that war unfolds.
Yeah, well, first of all, in terms of Deputy Boyd Barrett, I'm very struck by your comments. You said that the EU wants to use the war in Ukraine as an excuse to militarise and to increase defence spending. I mean, what? No disrespect. What planet are you on? I mean, the war has happened. War has happened. Russia has invaded Ukraine in a savage way, bombing civilians, has torn up the multilateral rules-based order, and no regard for UN universal values of territorial integrity, sovereignty, democracy. Russia's afraid of democracy and wants to kill democracy in the Ukraine. And you're saying Europe is using this as an excuse to militarise. Like, Europe didn't want this war. The European Union did everything it possibly could to prevent this war. President Macron did, Chancellor Scholz did. But when you're dealing with authoritarian regimes that don't apply democracy or democratic principles to how they conduct their countries and states, it creates vulnerabilities. There's a vulnerability now in terms of the security architecture of Europe. I mean, Germany believed in trade and in good relationships with Russia over a long period, certainly since the early 90s. And they've been very consistent in that. And unfortunately, I don't think that has been responded to by the Russian Federation over time. And the latest manifestation of that now is the wholesale war on Ukraine. We already saw a taste of it in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea, and people like yourself and others in this House were very silent about that in 2014, because I raised it, well, maybe not you as much, party opposite was actually quite silent at the time, and I raised it in this House on European debates, and Sinn Féin didn't want to know about it at the time. But that's that. But the point I'm trying to make is, I think it's very unfair. You need to, the tendency in the debate always is to blame the EU. I mean, your whole contribution was blaming the EU, not Russia. Like, Russia caused this war. It makes absolute sense that Europe would now reflect in terms, and Europe has to look ahead.
In Putin's prisons at the moment.
Democracy is important. Democracy now is in recession. Democracy is receding vis-à-vis authoritarianism. Like, Europe wants to defend its single market, economy, quality of life of people. There's no warmongers that I've ever noticed in Europe. No warmongers in the European Union that I have seen in my last number of years.
Like the ones selling arms to Saudi Arabia, they're not warmongers.
I've been there, you know, in terms of...
Oh, come on.
Europe's predominant role is an interventionist one, which is trying to... Of course it's shocking, because it doesn't fit your worldview. Your worldview...
It's to dictatorships like Saudi Arabia.
And the immediate focus of your approach is always to attack the European Union and not the aggressors, not the despots, not the authoritarians. That is your response all the time. So we attack the war on Russia, but it's all the European Union's fault. Seems to be your fallback position. Anyway, that is the essence of the presentation. And Europe goes to great lengths to intervene to prevent conflict, and where there is conflict, to provide humanitarian assistance. Probably the biggest provider of humanitarian assistance in the world is the European Union, to less developed states and to areas of conflict. and enormous sums of money are allocated. And again, look at the Recovery and Resilience Fund coming out of COVID. Enormous sums of money, first time ever that Europe collectively borrowed and gave enormous sums to countries to enable them to come through COVID. Enormous sums of money in terms of that.